In this video, I really want to talk about how anyone can heat treat. It's really not that hard to do. You're following a recipe just like you're baking a cake or smoking a brisket. It is the same type of process. If you can follow the instructions in the datasheet, you can do it. And to prove that, I taught my son, Russell, who's 12 years old, how to heat treat. I also explained to him how the datasheet works, but he mostly just wanted to dunk on me all during that, so we're not going to show that recording.
Abby, come here. Abby, speaking to the mic. Say something.
But I do want to go through the MagnaCut datasheet so that we can discuss the elements of a datasheet and how you follow one. So the first page, and in many datasheets, the first several pages, are basically information about the steel. Some of this is useful information, some of it is essentially advertising the steel. But on the MagnaCut datasheet, there's a description of the steel, there's information about the microstructure, there are bar charts that are supposed to show the comparative properties, typical applications, which doesn't matter to us because we are heat treating the steel for knives. There's the composition of the steel that could be interesting to you, though not directly relevant to the heat treating. There's some various properties like elastic modulus we can mostly ignore. Then some property tests that were done on the steel. Again, none of this do we need for the heat treatment. On page 2 is where all of the heat treatment information is. And we are going to skip to the hardening step for now. Why do we want to harden the steel? Well, when steel is soft as it arrives from the steel company, it is easy to drill and cut and grind. It is very soft, it is easy to work with. However, when it is in a knife, it is too soft. When we're trying to cut with a very thin edge, that edge will roll or deform. It will not hold up, it will not stay sharp because it is not hard enough. So we have to harden the steel. So the first step listed on this datasheet is preheating. This step is optional, and I rarely, if ever, do it. My preference is to preheat the furnace, not the steel. And so if you have two furnaces, then maybe it makes sense to add it. Doing a preheating step can help with warping, just because we make sure that the steel is one consistent temperature before then ramping up to our final temperature. But the first real step that we're doing is austenitizing, and that is just our high temperature process. We stick the steel into a very hot furnace and hold there for some period of time. So for MagnaCut, it says to do that between 1950 and 2200 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 1065 to 1205 Celsius. Going to the menu, schedules, and we are going to austenitize.
Okay.
We're going to edit that, and then you can type in our temperature.
2050.
Gotta push hard. This is not an iPad.
Okay.
Okay, now push save. Now push austenitize.
And then start.
Now push start. Push no.
Oh.
Push 0. Push enter. No, there's nothing in there. That's important.
Okay.
And it's going to take a while for this to heat up, but we still have to get our steel ready, so that doesn't matter.
Okay.
So now seems like as good a time as any to talk about equipment. I have 3 even heat furnaces. My main furnace is the KO model. That's the one that goes up to high temperature. I previously had an LB model. That one has a little bit larger chamber in terms of the width and the height. The lengths are the same between the two models. So I moved to the KO series because it could go to 2400 degrees Fahrenheit rather than 2200. So I prefer the higher temperature model just because I heat treat a wide range of steels, and occasionally I do want to heat treat very hot. But the LB model worked very well. There are other furnace companies as well, but Even Heat is the one that I have bought previously. I also have the LT model, which sits on top of my base KO model. The LT is dedicated for tempering, so it's tuned for the low temperature range of tempering, and it also allows me to temper something immediately after quenching and going into liquid nitrogen, rather than waiting the very long time for the furnace to cool down. One of the big decisions with choosing a furnace is 120 versus 240 volt, or 110/220. And the 220/240 volt models heat up much faster and usually they have a little bit larger chamber. So usually they're about twice as fast, and that's not just on your initial heat up, but also how long it takes to rebound after putting in a piece of steel. So if you can run off of the higher voltage, you definitely want to. And if you don't have access to a plug that can handle that, you should talk to an electrician, because there isn't much cost difference between the two, but you'll greatly appreciate the higher voltage models. The other big decision you'll make is the depth of the chamber. So that's how long of a knife you can heat treat. And sometimes knife makers make the mistake of thinking they don't need one that's very long. The reason why you want to go a little bit longer than you might think you need is, one, you might want to make a longer knife than you think you're currently making. If you want to make a big Bowie or a kitchen knife, you're going to want length. Also, you don't want to have the knife up against the door or up against the back, because there will be some temperature distribution, especially right next to the door. And so if you can have a few inches of space between the blade and the ends of the furnace, you'll get better temperature distribution. So those are the furnaces. Oh, my third even heat, that's a salt pot. I have a couple of videos about salt pots. It's kind of a different way of heat treating, but obtains the same result. So if you're interested, you can watch those videos. In terms of aluminum plates, you can buy those from different places. It doesn't matter too much. If you can get the aluminum plates, you can quench with those. Oil can be a little bit harder to find. I have a separate video testing a bunch of different oils. My favorite is Parks 50. If you get one oil, get Parks 50. It's sometimes just called Quench 50 or whatever, because Parks is a trademark name. And you can get those from a couple of places. And also dewars. Dewars for liquid nitrogen, you can buy just a generic off-brand dewer from eBay or Amazon. They're not too expensive. The main things you'll be looking for there are capacity, which is normally rated in liters. I have a small 10-liter model. And then the size of the neck. The neck size is usually 50 millimeters or 2 inches, which can be limiting for certain wide knives or strangely shaped knives. But the bigger the neck is, the faster it will lose liquid nitrogen. So often you have to get a pretty large dewer to be able to have the larger neck. Sometimes people will get around this by temporarily pouring the liquid nitrogen into a separate cooler and doing the cryo and then pouring it back in. You'll definitely lose more liquid nitrogen that way, but if you're only rarely making wider knives, that might be a viable solution. So that's some stuff, general stuff on equipment. I should mention the tempering furnace. You can do that in a kitchen oven. It'll be more variable, but I really like having the dedicated tempering furnace for what I do. All right, I think you're ready to go. Very safe, very safe. One thing that datasheets often don't address is what you do to protect the steel from scale and decarburization. So scale is the black oxide that forms at the surface, but even more dangerous in some ways is the decarb layer underneath. That's a layer of steel that no longer has carbon in it and thus does not harden. So if you get a decarb layer at your edge, then the edge will not be hard, which of course is our goal. So here's a picture of some AEBL steel that was heat treated without any protection from the atmosphere, and it has a very thick decarb layer, about 0.2 millimeters thick. The most common method for stainless steels and high alloy steels is to use foil. Those come in either 309 or 321 stainless. The 309 goes up to higher temperatures, but is a little bit more expensive. So you put the knife in a foil envelope, and you fold all of the sides, usually twice. And then some people will put talcum powder in to prevent sticking. I haven't had issues with sticking unless I'm going really high temperature for a long time. But some people have more issues than me. Some people also say you should put paper or something in there to burn up, but that is not necessary. The other major method for protecting the surface is to use some type of heat treat coating. I've done a study on this recently, but I have not yet published the results. Coatings are not my favorite. They're usually used for oil quenching or water quenching, because taking off foil when the steel is really hot is really difficult to do quickly before then quenching. So foil's not usually recommended for oil quenching or water quenching steels. But you definitely want to use foil with high alloy and stainless steels. With low alloy and carbon steels, you can often get away without using any type of protection because of the lower temperature that the steel is at, but you need to be ready to remove a little bit of material to get rid of the scale and the small decarb layer that will form.
I think I ruined your foil, Dad.
Oh, Russell. Okay, you did it. It's a miracle. Okay, now we're gonna fold it. Oh, look what you did to that poor corner.
Why is it called heat treating foil? This just looks like aluminum wrap.
This is 309 stainless foil.
Cool.
Aluminum would melt. That'd be really bad. Okay, so we put the steel into the packet. And now we're gonna start folding creases. I'm gonna do this one. You can do the rest.
Why do you have to do it with one of those things?
Because it makes nice, sharp folds like that.
Okay.
Okay, now you're gonna do this one.
Okay. So do it like this. There it is. Now switch it. Switch it. Switch it. Okay. Switch.
Now, you're gonna do this whole one. So you're gonna go up, you're gonna go up, you're gonna go up, and you're gonna try to make an even line across.
I don't know. I don't know how to do it. Better not even line. Okay. That's right.
You know, last one. Okay, now all the way across. All the way across. Okay, now we're gonna do all of that again.
Just on the other side.
No, you're gonna fold this over again. You're gonna fold that over again, and then fold this over again.
Okay.
Well, we don't want to fold anyway. Let's see the fold go.
I'm getting very close to the piece of steel, but I think we're good. Okay.
Okay, turn this the other way so that it is going to end up on the steel, not on the packet.
Okay. Ooh, that is hot. Okay. And
Now close it.
oh, that is hot.
Yeah, it's 2050 degrees.
Actually, one.
And there are hold times for each temperature. This is for a fixed thickness of around 1/8 inch. You could go for a longer hold time if you have thicker steel. If you have 1/4 inch, you should probably hold longer. So it says for 1950, hold for 30 minutes, 2050, 20 minutes, and 2200, only 5 minutes. The hold time is supposed to be after the steel has reached the target temperature. Sometimes I cheat and I start the timer after the furnace has rebounded back up to the temperature. The temperature of the furnace drops from opening the door and also sticking in a cold piece of steel. And then once it gets back up to temperature, I will start the timer. Now, if we're talking only a 5-minute hold time, that may not be a good way of doing it. And you need to add on a couple minutes for the time that it takes the steel to reach the temperature. If the surface of the steel has reached temperature, the core reaches that same temperature only a few seconds later, because steel is a very good conductor of heat, and also because knives are usually pretty thin. So if the steel is the same color as the furnace, it has reached the temperature. So you can get some experience with how long this takes to reach the temperature after putting the steel in. You can open the door and check and see if it's the same color yet, or if you've got a window, that would be even more convenient, though not many knife furnaces have those. So, but you can add on a couple minutes to adjust for the time it takes to reach the temperature, and then your soak time is after it has reached the temperature. So the steel is in there soaking, and carbides are dissolving, and everything is getting ready to quench. So quenching is the next step. Quenching just means that we are rapidly cooling the steel. And the data sheet here says you can plate quench, which means putting the steel in between two aluminum plates or some other type of metal, and then that draws the heat out of the steel. And if you have a flat piece of steel, then this is pretty easy to do, and it is significantly faster than just an air quench. With big companies that are using large vacuum furnaces, they use a gas quench. You could just use forced air of some kind in your own home shop. Plate quenching is pretty popular because it helps keep the steel flat. And you could quench in salt or oil as well. So this steel has relatively high hardenability, so even an air quench will lead to high hardness. Hardenability is just how slow you can cool the steel and it still be a good quench. So plate quenching is my preferred method.
All right, let's get this thing out. Whew. Oh, this hurts my face a lot. I can't, it's not in good enough. Okay. Wow. Ow.
Do not drop that brick. Okay. Next is cold treatment. This is optional. So this is like dry ice or even your home freezer or liquid nitrogen. And these three different options are listed on the data sheet. So either just going to room temperature with no cold treatment or putting it in the freezer or putting it in liquid nitrogen. There are hardness values here for each of those scenarios. A home freezer will make a difference. Some knife makers will say that it doesn't, but you can perform these simple experiments yourself and see that the hardness is higher with a freezer. Cold treatments are most effective if you do it directly after the quench. You can think of it as an extension of the quench. We are just quenching to below room temperature, and that can give a little bit higher hardness. Generally, we use baling wire and loop it through a hole in the sample so that we don't lose the piece in the dewar. In this case, I did not drill a hole, so we just poked a hole through the used foil and used that. I think in retrospect this was a mistake. The piece was too close to the same width as the neck. Made it unnecessarily dangerous when we should have just drilled a hole to begin with. Most knives have holes in them for scales and pins and things, so that's not normally an issue. In terms of time in the liquid nitrogen, 30 to 60 minutes is plenty. There are some people that say you need 24 hours or even more, but it doesn't actually help. I'm not going to explain the mechanisms of all of that. In fact, I'm going to discuss the mechanisms of very little in this video because it's all about just following the step-by-step procedure. When you bake a cake, you don't necessarily need to know what the baking soda is doing. If you can follow the recipe, usually it turns out okay. Now, a professional, if they bake a cake and it ends up too flat or too dense or too puffy, they can make adjustments to the recipe to fix it. And if you don't know the mechanisms, you cannot do that. But if the recipe is good, it will work. Another thing that a professional can do is tune the recipe to get a cake exactly how they want it, the right amount of crumb, the right amount of density. And if you learn the mechanisms behind heat treating and the details, you can do the same thing with heat treating steel. You can get the right hardness, toughness, corrosion resistance balance for your exact application. But before you learn that level of knowledge, you can still heat treat steel by following the simple instructions. So back to the heat treatment. After we have quenched and done optionally some type of cold treatment, you temper. So you put steel into an oven or back into your furnace at low temperature. For MagnaCut, something like 300 to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 150 to 230 Celsius. And you hold it for 2 hours. Then you take the steel out and air cool it back to room temperature. You can also quench in water. That is not necessary. But if you're in a hurry, that is an option. And then you put it back in the furnace for another 2 hours. I'm not going to explain why you have to do it twice. Again, we're not discussing the why behind everything. We are just talking about the steps right now. So with that information, the austenitize, the quench, and the temper, those are the three main steps with an optional cold treatment. And then there is a chart on the datasheet that shows different hardness values for different temperature combinations. So if we use 2050 degrees austenitize and a 350 degree temper, it says that should be about 61.5 Rockwell. If we add a liquid nitrogen treatment, it should go up to 62. The difference in hardness between a room temperature quench and a liquid nitrogen added step goes up with higher austenitizing temperatures. So if we look at 2150 with a 350 temper, that is 62 Rockwell without a cold treatment. And if adding in liquid nitrogen, it is 63.5. So the importance of the cold treatment goes up as we are trying to get to higher hardness levels and as we use a higher austenitizing temperature. So you want to be careful with how high you are austenitizing if you're not using any type of cold treatment. Another thing to note on this datasheet is that there is a recommended heat treatment. This can be found in a lot of datasheets, though it can take different forms. The MagnaCut recommended heat treatment is very simple. It says austenitize at 2050, quench, and then temper at 350. And it says you can add an optional freeze treatment. So very simple. There is nothing to misunderstand. You use 2050 Fahrenheit, that's 1120 Celsius, and then you quench and you temper at 350 Fahrenheit, which is about 175 Celsius. You can add in a cryo step or your home freezer or dry ice directly after the quench, which is where it's the most effective. The cold treatment is less effective if you do it in between tempering steps, though a lot of datasheets will recommend you do so because sometimes there is less propensity for warping if you add in that tempering step. But I usually don't recommend it because the cold treatment is also less effective to get that benefit of less chance of warping or movement. So I did not cover the steps that happen after forging, but before hardening for a forging bladesmith. I do have a separate video on thermal cycling, which is primarily normalizing and annealing. So if you want to learn about those procedures, then you can go watch that video. But for this one, we try to keep things simple with the most important steps of austenitizing, quenching, and tempering. And that's basically the whole datasheet. And a lot of datasheets are similar. There can be some differences. You might need to do some scrolling to get to the right page where all of the instructions are. They may be a little more loosey-goosey on what their recommendations are. You know, they might give a pretty wide range. But that's basically what it means to follow a datasheet. So now that you know how to use a datasheet, where do you find datasheets? Well, I can't link to every source of datasheet. Sometimes you can just Google it. You know, if you want to heat treat Venatus 4 Extra, you type in Venatus 4 Extra datasheet, and it will often come up. Sometimes they're a little harder to find. I have an article connected to this video in the description where I have a bunch of links to different sources of datasheets direct from the manufacturers. I also talk a little bit about datasheets you should not use that I do not like, and I don't think they help people very much in heat treating correctly. Another source for good heat treating information is my book, Knife Engineering. In the back of the book, I have heat treatment guides for most of the knife steels that are out there. And I give my recommendations based on datasheets for steels that I don't have that much experience with. And with steels that I have tested considerably, like for hardness and toughness balance, I give my own recommendations that are usually not too different than datasheets, but sometimes they will vary. You know, if I do a datasheet heat treatment versus a new one and the new one performs significantly better, I will recommend that one in the book. Knife Engineering is also a great book for you if you watch this video and you start heat treating and it's going well, but you want to start to learn about the mechanisms of heat treating. What's happening in heat treating? How do you optimize in heat treatment? How do you heat treat different steels to get different properties? You can learn that starting with Knife Engineering. My website, knifesteelnerds.com, also has a lot of that content, but it can be hard to get into a website like that with all of the individual articles, as opposed to the book that teaches you in order everything you need to know. You know, it builds upon itself reading chapter by chapter. So I recommend my own book. That's what I wrote it for. It's written for knife makers to learn about heat treating and about steel and how it works. And so if you want to learn more, check out that book. So for hardness testing, I have a pretty basic hardness tester. It's a Grizzly hardness tester. I think this model is no longer available, though there was nothing special about the model. It was identical to other imported Rockwell hardness testers. I just liked getting it from Grizzly, which is a somewhat known company, so it might have a little bit better customer service. A lot of people like to get used Wilson Rockwell hardness testers or other reliable old brands, but most of them will work. You just got to learn how to maintain it and how to calibrate it. So mine is totally fine. I've used fancier ones in my work as a metallurgist, and these basic old ones or even import ones work just fine. So for testing with Russell, I ground both sides of the steel. This is important for two reasons. One is to remove any decarb and scale so that we're not testing through that with the Rockwell tester. The other thing is to keep it perfectly flat. If it's not flat, you will get off readings. As an extreme example, if you're trying to test a knife bevel, the reading's going to be way off. It won't even be reasonable. Many points off. It will not be a reliable number. You really need dead flat to get good, reliable testing. So I ground both sides, and then me and Russell tested with my Grizzly hardness tester.
Okay.
Now we put the steel here,
Okay.
and this is our rotation handle, okay? So righty-tighty, that goes up. Lefty-loosey, that goes down. So we're going to go gently until it's touching the steel. Okay, and you see how this moved now? I'm going to rotate it tighter, and this is going to go around. You want it to go around 3 times until this little dial right here is on this red dot.
Okay.
We want that little dial on this red dot, and we want the big dial pointing straight up. Okay? I go around once, twice, and then 3 times straight up. And you see I got lucky, it landed right on the C here. If it wasn't on the C, I would move it until it is pointing directly at the C, right on there. Next, I pull on this handle right here. You wait till it stops moving. And then we're going to push this lever right here. Okay? Push that lever. And then we read on the dial. So this is 61. The little lines are halves and the bigger lines are wholes. So 61, 62, 63, and then like 0.2, 63.2. Okay, and then when we're done, we loosen up again.
Is it good? Is that mean it's hard?
Yep, it is very hard. Okay, now you are going to do it.
Okay.
And we want to make sure we don't measure exactly where the other one was. So you look for the little indent, and we're just going to measure away from that little indent.
Okay. So we wait until it's touching, and then we keep going.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Not too fast, not too fast. Okay, you're almost there. You went... No, you don't back up.
I can't.
All right, let's start over. You cannot go backwards, okay? You
Why
gotta go really smooth.
Why can't you go backwards?
That's just how it works.
Okay. I'm going smooth. Well, get close first. Okay.
You're not there yet. You still need one more round.
How do I stop it from doing that? No. We're gonna go the same. We're gonna be at the same spot.
Okay, stop. Stop touching. Okay, now twist the dial so that it's pointing to the C. Okay, now pull the little handle. Yep, that one. Pull. Okay, now let go.
Now pull your lever.
Now lever on the side. Okay, what does it say?
62.
That is 63, my friend.
Oh.
Do you see?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good job. High five. So was heat treating hard?
No.
Was it fun?
Yeah.
Good. So I hope you learned something about heat treating. I hope you're ready to go out and start heat treating. You know, don't be afraid. People try to tell you that you're not smart enough to do it, or you should send it off to a heat treating company, only they know how. Those should not be barriers. There are reasons to have outside companies heat treat steel, but heat treating being too complicated is not one of them, in my opinion. So don't be afraid. You can do it. It's not that hard. You can learn how to read a data sheet. You can learn how to do the basic steps of heat treating. And I hope we get more and more knife makers that heat treat their own steel. So if you enjoyed this, go out and heat treat. You can also go to knifesteelnerds.com, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to keep learning about heat treating. We're doing new experiments all the time. I did a study on coatings for heat treating. I did a study on cold rolling recently. I want to do another video about Damascus, like which steels combine the best for Damascus. So if you want to support more of those studies, you can go to patreon.com/knifesteelnerds, where I use any money that comes in directly for knife steel research, and you can nerd out with the rest of us learning about heat treating and steels and how they perform based on your experience with heat treating after watching this video. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Until next time, bye-bye.